Hi, it's
Good afternoon, everyone, and those on the phone. This is Catcher Bain on staff at the State Board of Education. The time is 3:31, and we're going to get started on the meeting. In the room, we're just going to say some of this for the record. So this is an A2F study session, so this isn't it's posted as a board meeting because it looks like we now have a quorum, but it's a little more informal because it's a study session, so no action's being taken, it's information only. And because President Narducci is not able to join us in person, we're just going to facilitate it from a staff level. So in the meeting room here, we have members Mack and Ruiz and Superintendent Hoffman, and on the phone we have member Mack, member Burton, and President Narducci. And it's member K, who's in person. So that's 6, so we do have a quorum, so we have to abide by open meeting law and all that kind of good stuff, but it can still be rather informal. So with that, I think we'll jump straight in. We have one request to speak, and we do have to call the public on the agenda. So I think we'll operate that like we normally do for formally for the call to the public, and then we can move into the rest of the agenda. So, Brad.
Good afternoon, members of the board. I just want to take a couple minutes as you start looking at the A through F accountability system here in Arizona. My name is Brad Galbraith. I'm with the Foundation for Excellence in Education. And you have access to one of our experts on your technical advisory committee, but I wanted to be here today just to highlight a few main points about A through F grading. The first of those is that as you look at how we're doing A through F grading in Arizona, that you make sure that you realize the importance of the overall grade when looking at A through F grading. So I know that there's a tendency to also break out into subgrades, but the overall grade is also important for, one, bringing in people like me, parents who are looking for schools for their kids, where to live, what schools to send them to. It brings them into the conversation and is an invitation to dive deeper into the data that A through F provides. The second point that I wanted to raise was that it needs to focus on student learning outcomes, and these can be anything that you deem important here in Arizona, but it needs to be objective and balance progress and proficiency. The third point that I wanted to raise for you all is that the expectations need to be set high and set high equally for all students, with the belief that every single one of our kids can learn. And that they each have that opportunity to do it with the help of our top-notch teachers, so that there's some consistency for teachers, for administrators, and for students. So with that, I thank you for your time and your consideration.
So that concludes the call to the public, unless anybody else had anything. We do have members of ATAC here who might be lending some support throughout the presentation. Before handing it over to Wendy, I did just want to mention that just like with our other public meetings, we are recording this on YouTube, and the members who are not here, at least a few, I know for sure, plan on viewing this when they are available. So just as a heads up, and it'll be available for your review also, just like a normal meeting. And then the other thing is that we did receive and distributed a letter from ASA via email and also a hard copy. There were a couple other communications that were distributed shortly before this meeting that we'll make sure that board members get later. So with that, I think I'll hand it over to Wendy for the first couple items on the agenda, which will probably kind of meshed into one. So, Wendy.
Good afternoon, President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, board members. We appreciate the opportunity to study with you today. It's very important that we go over this and that we make sure that ATAC is meeting and following your guidance and what we're looking for not only the K-8 component scoring, but also district components. So the format that we were going to follow is I will do a high level on district components, sort of the history where we're at, and then ATAC members would like to voice. You built as the state board built a really nice, diverse group, and some of the concerns and even some of the things that they would like to share, I think you would like to hear personally. Then if we can sort of discuss the K-8 portion of it and then do the same thing for district letter grades if you're comfortable with that. Okay, so I will go ahead and get this up. So we actually started our initial work back in September of last year, in October. So we've actually been working with component scoring. We didn't just finish and then start this. So we've actually had work on this since last December, some work in January. So we keep going back and reviewing it. When we were looking at why are we doing district components, we went back. We knew it was in legislation, but we went back and reviewed the two major components of legislation that states we are to do it by component, and we're also supposed to put it on the report cards. So our last file in there, your slide in there will actually show you for this part of it what that could look like on report cards. We took a look at and looked at different kinds of approaches. Not all the approaches are up here. These are the ones more that we have provided you data on. One of the approaches that was considered is like the regular cut scores, 90, 80, 70, 60. Keeping in mind that we made no major changes to K-8, we took into consideration anything that we did that may impact and change scores. So if you're a school, what we do for component scoring, if all of a sudden your letter grade changes when nothing's changed, we want to make sure that did not occur. So when we look at just straight scoring, we initially saw that was going to have a big impact. The other one was to look at maybe kind of some standard deviation. And because of the different skewnesses of the different data points, again, when we started putting that together, we would see too that there would be a variance. So one of the standard ways that you look at is benchmarking. So we looked at the first 2 years of distributions of letter scores, found out what it was more like a percentile ranking, and then applied that to the two biggest components, which would have been the proficiency and the growth. And I'll talk a little bit more of that in a second. And then in any kind of good benchmarking, sometimes you go in and you move the scores around a little bit more so you're more accurate. The other thing that we might possibly want to consider and recommend is that you consider, if we're not doing any major changings to K-8, that it stays steady, that the component scoring that you decide upon and when you decide upon would stay consistent too until major changes occur. So the one that we're presenting to you today, even though you have some documentation that shows some of the others, was the adjusted one for the percentiles. So percentiles are a little different than percentages. And just for people, just to bring us all back into the wonderful world of math, let's say we had 30 students, 10 scored 100, 10 scored 67, and 10 scored 33. So those 100% kids, they're all excited. They're in the 100%, right? 33% of them got 100%, right? But when you look at their percentile, they're actually in the 67.7 percentile. So I'm going to try to make sure that when I talk percentiles versus percentage that I keep that straight for you. So one of the reasons we looked at component scoring and looking at it the way we did is that if we set the cut scores this year, there would be no major changes the way we did it to A through F. They'd be pretty consistent for 17 and 18, and we've got some graphs in there to show that. The component score would roll up to a GPA overall grade, and everybody understands an overall grade. What that would do then is if a school would like to appeal, they appeal on the component. So right now there's just the overall grade. They go through their static file. They find that .025 or that .25 and appeal on this. What this does is it focuses it back on the component. So then they look at the component and say, this component is a C, this component's an A. Let me look at my C. The other thing is we would stay steady, as I said, unless a major change. So in 22, if we were to get a new assessment, if everything else were to stay the same, we didn't change acceleration readiness, we didn't change EL, we kept growth on the SGPs, we would then just have to set cut scores on the new component. So it's a little bit more resilient against change. So as you can see here, we said the way we did it the two ways, the way we went with the other one, there's a little more A's, but there's also some F's. The other ways we had less A's and no F's. So this one seemed to be a little bit more in line. So right now, if we were to set the cut points, schools could go back to their 2017 letter grade and their 2018, look at the points they received here, and see what their component scoring would have been. Then they would just do a regular weighted GPA, and we can help, people who haven't done that for a while, we could actually give them a spreadsheet that they could just plug in their numbers. But most people can do a weighted GPA. And then based on the cut scores over there, they would receive their ABC as an overall. This is what it might possibly look like on A through F on the report card. So if you were going into a school right now that was a hybrid school, now, right, we're not doing 912, and this is probably not the example I should have used. I probably should have just put a K8 up there. You would see that when we built report cards and we built the accountability, we put it so that we could easily display what that component grade is, and then they'd always have their overall letter grade where it exists currently. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to sit down, and some of the ATAC members are going to come up, and they'll introduce themselves, and they will share a little bit of the process that we've gone through over the last 6 to 9 months.
Good afternoon, members. Superintendent Hoffman, members of the board, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Jason Pienkowski, and I serve on the ATAC committee, specifically focusing on elementary feedback. I know that conversations have occurred on the A through F grading process for quite a few months during the ATAC meeting, and I think a few of the key points that came up during that process was to make the ideas between 14 or 15241 useful, usable, and used. So was the information that was going to be displayed during those component scorings, was it going to be useful for the people intended to consume that information? Was it going to be usable? Was it going to be over convoluted so that the context of the information being conveyed was not going to be readily available? I think that the examples that were shown today do help make those pieces of information useful and usable for the intent of people to use that information to make decisions. So various different ideas and concepts were discussed with me during meetings to try and make that delivery of information as smooth as possible. Coming from the elementary perspective, I understand that people are looking for choices for schools and are not quite concerned about outcomes related to graduation rate or those types of outcomes. But right now are looking for are those students progressing in a manner that they feel is comfortable. So with these component scoring, the concept of the ABCD and the manner in which it's conveyed will give context to those decision makers to be able to inform their decisions.
Good afternoon, Superintendent Hoffman, members of the board. My name is Sean Rickard. I'm the superintendent at Pima Unified School District, and I'm also a member of the ATAC. And as we look at this question on component scoring, we need to see it within the broader context of what we've developed as far as an ADAF accountability system. We developed a system that has multiple elements, all geared towards identifying what is a quality school. And that was always the basis for what we have. So the idea that now we're breaking out the components so that we can display them separately on a dashboard really isn't much of a stretch. It isn't as much of a change as one might think we were trying to make here. We're just simplifying in a lot of ways, and in many ways increasing the transparency for users, both parents, stakeholders, and school users in the field, to be able to look at what makes up a school's letter grade. As Wendy said, a school can look at where their weakness is and clearly see A, where they want to appeal, and B, where they want to devote resources. So it provides schools with that opportunity to move forward. The math on it looks a lot trickier than it is. I know I've spent the last day asking lots of, tricky questions because I'm like, okay, is this really as simple as it looks like it is? The long and the short of it is as simple as it looks like it is. That schools basically have exactly the same distribution of points under this system as they've had under the existing system for the last couple of years. We've preserved that consistency. As the speaker in the call to the public, brought up, that's important. There are changes we have to make to our accountability system, but our goal should be to try to maintain as much consistency as possible. We don't want to have, shifting sands underneath our foundations in education. So that's a lot of what we have here is a system that basically enables us to follow the law by preserving or by presenting a dashboard that breaks out the components, while at the same time maintaining and preserving the consistency of the system we have and maintaining the components that the state board has approved in the past. So, thank you.
That is our ATAC members for the district component scoring. We are available to answer any questions that you have at this point, whether it's myself or one of our analysts or another one of our ATAC members, President Narducci and Superintendent.
Thank you, Wendy. President Narducci, if you're on the phone, members of the board. I just wanted to clarify, for K through 8, are the 4 components going to be just proficiency, growth, EL, and then acceleration readiness? Is that going to be the 4 components?
Yeah, Superintendent Hoffman and members, yes, it's those. So there's no letter grade for like bonus points or anything like that.
Okay, so I was wondering too, if we're going to make sure, is there any, because I don't know, what are the bonus points for? Do you know?
Science and, hold on a second, SPED inclusion.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Kim.
And there was no issue with excluding bonus points?
Superintendent Hoffman and members, I think we kind of interpret the statute requires a letter grade for each indicator, and we feel that the bonus points aren't an indicator in the way that the statute outlines it. And we also, I haven't, I don't know about the data, but I'm sure Wendy could speak, because the bonus points, there's not really a distribution. There's probably not a very solid distribution because they're kind of all or nothing bonus points in some cases. I think science, we might tier it by like 1, 2, and 3. Assigning a letter grade to the bonus points, I think, would be not through it with the intent of the legislation, but I think also it would not be, to Jason's point, usable.
And that's one of the reasons we came in front of you today, Superintendent Hoffman, member boards, is discuss some of these ideas that are out there. How that could be included. Our focus was just on looking at the major components and then having a discussion where we want to go forward.
Thank you.
Is President Narducci, is he on the line? Or?
Yes. So.
He's on the phone.
Okay. President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, members.
Can you use the microphone?
Okay. I was trying to ask myself, where are we going? I don't know, somebody talked about that at the very beginning. Why are we doing this? And I understand by law we have to follow this. But within that, there's a purpose to it. And when we test schools, we test children, we're making an evaluation, qualitative assessment. Now, I'm going to 2 areas specifically, and that is for children who are in special ed. And those children, they test. And they have to test at grade level, at the level that they're in. Yes or no?
Yep.
So my question is why? And I'm going to that because I think that with certain policies or rules or however we do this, we can very easily place the labels, and the label is an undesirable student. And what I mean by that, a school's got to perform. It's got to get an A, a B. Hopefully you don't get a C. Hopefully you don't get a D. Hopefully you don't get an F. And somebody makes that decision. Family comes in the front door, like it or not. You look at that file and you go like, dang, what? It's a EL student. Barely got him from Mexico like last month. And what we don't want is somehow that file going into there's a waiting list, or going into some, file that you never get to. And why? Because it's going to be very expensive, very difficult to educate that child. So the EL student, special ed student, same thing, walks in your door and you go like, okay, this is going to be expensive. And this child's going to grade at it's going to test the same as a student who's not in special ed. And so my question is, why do we have that? First of all, special ed, why do we have that? What's the policy that we serve in doing that? And then secondly, for ELs, why are we doing it?
So President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, Member Ruiz, to answer parts of your question, board staff, we can reach out to the department's assessment team to figure out where it says that special education students have to be tested at grade level. So we can follow up with you on that. When you're discussing EL students and special education students, especially at the K-8 level, that conversation was very heavy when we had the A through F ad hoc back before I was executive director and I was just a deputy director. And hence, it's one of the reasons why when we were looking at proficiency and growth, that the board decided to weight growth heavier than proficiency, because the board felt that we really should be rewarding schools for taking all students, and that knowing the special education students and EL students with these schools that show substantial increases in growth, they can get the most points in growth. So growth was one of the reasons, one indicator to address your concerns, the old board. The second, the EL, is in our accountability system because it has to be per ESSA, and I believe it's sitting at 10 points. It's been a while since I've talked a lot about the accountability system. It was my life for the first 12 months of my position. So I think with those two areas, and then we see the special education bonus, and the special education bonus was requested by Member Baker. And it goes right along with what you're saying of just ensuring that schools are taking all students. So when you're looking at your special education population, that's how your bonus points get. I know I'm missing something, but that's why you're getting those bonus points, because you are taking those students. You are taking on that challenge of educating all kids. Do you have any follow-up questions?
Yeah, but so you go, okay, here's the reward, you get bonus points, and I think it's under the acceleration, or is it just, it's the bonus point category. I'll go to acceleration and readiness afterwards. But the bonus portion. And in the bonus portion, you have special ed inclusion. The max that you can get out of bonus points is how many?
2.
2% or 2 points? 2 points. Mm-hmm. Okay. What's the total number of points that you can get? Right. So it's 2%. So we're saying is the bonus is 2%. You bring in kids in special ed, 2%. Now, what's the negative? You bring in like 3 or 4 special ed kids, small school, I don't know, if they're more than 10% of your population, it's a negative. Mathematically, it's a negative. So you get 2% positive for bringing them in, but if you bring in too many, you better be the first 2 kids in special ed that come in. You better not be number 3 to number 10 or to number 15, because you're going to come in and you're not going to score well. And so the schools, we put this pressure on them to put that file, kind of just put that in the, we'll get to it file after everybody's enrolled. And so then how do we get around that? How do we avoid that?
Superintendent or President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, Member Ruiz, I would hope that schools are not turning away students or putting them on wait lists because
nobody will ever admit it.
They're in special education. All I can say is this, that it was highly debated in the ad hoc as well as on the board. Some members, Member K, I think you were on the board at that time. Everyone else might be like right at the end of that. Yes. And Member Baker, like I said earlier, he was the one who proposed the special education bonuses, and there was a lot of conversation around that. And the board discussed the same concerns that you're bringing up today. And I think it's a concern that the board should continue to look at. But I also know that one of the, and I'm sure the people from the field will agree with me on this, one of the complaints that staff hear, and we've discussed it at ATAC as well, is that the board has changed the accountability system every year that it's been implemented, which then lacks the consistency in the field to get where they need to be when trying to increase their score. So I think at this point, we need to continue to have that conversation of how to make the best accountability system we can that holds schools accountable for taking all kids. But we also have to consider keeping things consistent for now. Because I do think that whichever direction the board goes in until our new assessment is put in place, that's the consistency. So this was the first year that we were pretty consistent. For the next 2 years, with the 2 years of AZ merit testing or AZ M2 testing, we will have consistency. And then we can look into, when we change the assessment, if there are any other changes that should occur, such as what you brought forth. Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry, President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, Member Ruiz, I also don't know enough of what else is going on in the country around special education students and EL students. At the time that the state board developed our accountability plan, we looked at what other states were doing. We were pretty similar to some other states. Some states took what we were doing and implemented themselves. So that's also something that our staff can look into with your concern with special education students.
Mm-hmm. So, President Narducci, Madam Superintendent, members, there's nothing that would prevent us in the future from providing more bonus points for special ed inclusion. Number one question. And then second, there's nothing that would prevent us also from making sure that I just don't understand the policy benefit of testing special ed students and expecting them to perform to hold them accountable in the same way. There should be, I believe there should be growth. But you get a kid, I don't know, it scores in the 95th percentile. Just always has. And then you get a special ed student who's never going to hit that. Maybe he's in the bottom 20%. And, God bless him, but he's doing his best, or she's doing her best, trying to get there. And it's never going to happen. So why should we test them the same?
So President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, Member Ruiz, we'll follow up with the policy of testing the special ed students, because I do not know if there is a policy or I don't know. I'll follow up with you. To your first point of nothing preventing for additional special ed bonus points, there isn't. But I can say from the original conversation of accountability, when looking at setting the numbers for the bonus point opportunities, the board at that time was very cautious of setting it too high so that schools could forget a whole indicator and still make up points. For example, when you look at K-8 acceleration, which has a couple different topics, right? Like you're decreasing your move on when reading students in third grade. You are at the system now, which will have to change for next year, is you're accelerating 8th grade students in mathematics. I know there's another one I'm forgetting. But if you raise the bonus points to a certain level, that can hide or shield the indicator with the least amount of points. And right now that's the K-8 acceleration, and it's EL. So if they can get all the bonus points in just science and special education, maybe they don't focus as much as on their EL students. And so it's weighting the different populations of students, but looking at the whole picture of a whole school and trying to ensure in the best way possible how you're reaching all students.
Okay. So
let me jump in a minute. This is Calvin Baker. President Narducci and Superintendent Hoffman and Member Luis. There's no question that special ed is a really, really challenging issue. And adding bonus points in for special ed inclusion was a difficult thing to accomplish. And I'm very glad that it's in there. And I think you bring up a really good point that, as I've been listening to you speak, that maybe sometime in the future we add an additional point for reaching the 10% or 12%. The danger, as Director Williams was alluding to, is we never, ever, ever want to incentivize the labeling of special ed students. We never want schools to give students that label so that they can get additional points. So we walk a fine line between recognizing and rewarding the schools who do accept and do great things with special ed kids while not incentivizing schools to identify kids who should not be identified.
Good point. So before I jump onto, there was another section, but I'll shut up and finish on the special ed stuff.
Go ahead. Who is on the phone?
Oh, this is Member Mack, President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, members. I guess I have a few questions. One, first off is I'm wondering where the component scoring is for the high school.
President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, Member Mack. Right now, we are waiting for the scores to come in for the 912 because we had such a major change with the subgroup improvement. When we start modeling for letter grades for the 912, because we'll have to revisit that, we will be revisiting component scoring at that time as well.
Thank you. And then another question is to Member Ruiz's point. I am also greatly concerned about all the populations, and I think the only way around it, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's really in order to get at that achievement gap and in order for populations not to be masked and the school's achievement not to be masked, it's really important that we look at the subgroup performance. And so I'm wondering how that I know, we're addressing that in the high school with the subgroup, but I really think looking at the subgroup growth and really focusing on growth is the only way. And I think with special education populations, there's such a wide range, and I can speak from experience that, working with special education populations, I've actually exited kids under my, in my classroom, which is my goal to give them enough support. They were growing to such a degree that they were actually exiting. But understanding that that's, because there's a lot of resources poured into this, this population. So understanding that's not universal either. I mean, there's a range, there's a continuum, and so I don't think there's just going to be one approach. And it's one thing to give bonus points just for having the representation, but it's a total other thing to actually grow the ones that we have under our stewardship. So I don't know what the balance is. I just wanted to just put that out there. But I really think to get to achievement gap, we have to look at growth and we have to look at subgroup. We have to drill down and we have to get to the point where we're not just satisfied with seeing an A as an overall score for a school, but we have to think of every school as a school in improvement, and how can every school continue to grow, and how can every school continue to grow each kid? To get away from that mentality that an A is means we don't have to worry about anything. So I don't know, but that's another another place I'm coming from, I guess. And then the other question I had was regarding, I was under the impression that we were going to set cut scores based on standard deviation, and that was going to be, moving forward, just a simpler, cleaner way to do it. So I'm a little concerned now we're talking about moving away from that, and then also that we're going to be having to set new cut scores every year based on whatever criteria. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, Member Mack, I'll respond to your first or second question, which was the subgroup growth. Subgroup performance is part of the K-8 model. It's in with the K-8 acceleration readiness. That was the indicator I was missing earlier. But we can take a deeper dive into that and study that, because one of the reasons why subgroup performance was recommended to the board for 912 was because we did have it in K-8. And I believe that Wendy, Director Davey, can answer your second question. Uncut score deviation.
President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, Member Mack, we were initially, when we started looking at using just straight standard deviation, again, our initial looks into that would have caused more of a change because some of those components don't have a normal distribution. So the chances of being able, like EL and as well as, because that's only 10 points, and then also with acceleration readiness, that tends to be very skewed. Also, it would have caused a bit of a change from what 17 and 18 was. So we were trying to stay more consistent with initially doing the benchmark since the model itself is not changing. Our goal would be when we add a new component or significantly change a component, that is what we start with as a standard deviation model. To set the scores initially and then let them remain solid as long as there's not a change, allowing schools to actually achieve a set mark.
So that's a little concerning to me because it doesn't lend itself to consistency or clarity.
President Narducci, members of the board, if I'm reading this correctly, so I'm just clarifying, aren't the cut scores going to stay the same? Because if we're looking at the A through F, like a GPA, then aren't the cut scores going to stay the same from year to year?
Superintendent Hoffman, President Narducci, for fiscal year 19, nothing is changing. So this is actually looking at fiscal year 20. And as of the study session, if there's some other direction you would like us to look at as well, we can. This one was, we're bringing this one forward because it did provide that consistency to the field.
Thank you for the clarification.
President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, members. So I know this is a very basic question. So are we having 2 letter grades then? A report card grade and a separate grade? Or is this one grade?
President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, member K. No, it is that your A through F letter grade is reported on your on the report card.
Okay. Superintendent Hoffman, or President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, members. So we're changing the way we're calculating it. So I'm thinking about some of the visibility for schools. Again, how are we going to provide the consistency from year to year for schools so that they have an understanding of how they're performing against against the formula. That's one question. And then I absolutely think we need to find a way for the bonus points to stay in the formula. I think those are critical. I think the conversation about special education is a really important one, particularly when you're talking about small schools. While I certainly hear Member Mack's concern about representation, the reality is there that a population can skew the overall performance for a school. And so perhaps it's even just digging in more to what is going on at that individual school if we're not looking at bonus points. Because if the purpose really is for improvement and to drive improvement at the school level and for student outcomes, then what are we doing when we know that the student population, the size of the population, could be skewed by those things? How do we look at that a little bit differently? So I realize that may not be your question, but the first one is the calculation.
President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, Member Kay, as far as consistency goes, the way we have it currently with the benchmarks being set, you could take those tables that we showed a few screens ago and literally take your 17 data, your 18 data, and your 19 data and apply to see what your letter grades would have been for every one of those components over the last 3 years. So that is where the schools would be able to see how they would have been for 3 years, then knowing what they would be going into for fiscal year 20 if this is a direction the board chooses to go. So that was the kind of consistency this kind of model would have afforded the schools. And the other question I had on the bonus, I can sort of address that too. We were hoping to get a little bit more direction there. The bonus point, we didn't do all the configurations with the bonus point because we wanted to make sure we were going in the right direction. That could be bonus on the top. It could be bonus applied at proficiency. We could do things with that bonus that'll have the best impact for the schools.
Okay. President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, I just have a question for Wendy, so I understand this. So when we're looking at these 4 boxes right now, what I heard you say is that schools can utilize the points that they've received since receiving a letter grade to determine where they would fall on the weighted GPA, correct? Okay. Then what I think I heard you say is that these numbers would not change unless there was a major overhaul to the accountability system.
Or an individual component.
Okay. So thinking long-term, big picture, and taking into account the 5-year assessment plan that the board approved, these all, if the board went with some type of weighted GPA that is basically this, then this would be implemented for the 1920 school year letter grades, which would come out in the fall of 20. And then it would also be used for the 2021 school year, which would come out in the fall of 21. And then in the 21-22 school year, we would be having a new statewide assessment. Therefore, then this would change. So all of that means that if the board went in this direction, there would be no change to K-8 until the 21-22 school year, because we have a new statewide assessment.
Correct.
Go ahead.
President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, members, why not stick with the current formula? What is driving this particular project?
So President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, Member Kay, what's driving this project is the language that was added to 15241, right? Yep, 15241, 2 sessions ago, for the dashboard.
Okay.
And so when you're looking at implementing a dashboard into the system, some of the conversation that had been occurring is how do you ensure that that summative letter grade, which is what we have been using, is talking to the letter grades that we're required to give to each indicator. Because let's say that you take the K-8 model, you know that growth is 50 points, right? So it's weighted the highest. maybe you receive a C as the indicator grade, but your EL, you get an A, and your K8, you get an A, and then you get your bonus points. Maybe your proficiency, you also get a C, and your ultimate grade is a C, B. The fear was that when you utilize each indicator separately, and then you gave a score separately, that it wouldn't be necessarily as clear to the public what the letter grade of that school would be.
Okay.
Wendy, did I answer that correctly? Okay. So this is a way of ensuring that it all folds up into that final letter grade.
I want to piggyback on that. President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, members. So let me see if I'm getting this. In these 4 categories, proficiency, growth, acceleration, readiness, English language, then when you have a dashboard, would you have a dashboard or an indicator for each one of these separate boxes?
Yes. Yes. So when we look at the state report card, so by federal law, the SEA, which is the Department of Education, is required to have a report card for every school in Arizona. So what the department's doing, which is very smart financially, is they're utilizing the same program for the dashboard. Okay. So when you take the report card, this is an example of what it would look like. So if you just look at the K-8 side of the model, there would be, so this is a hybrid school.
It is.
Okay. So this is a hybrid school. So let's say your school is serving K-12 students. This is what your report card would look like. You would receive a letter grade in each of the indicators: proficiency, growth. You would receive one for EL, growth and proficiency, for K-8, acceleration, readiness. You see the 9-12 side, you'd receive a letter grade for CCRI, your graduation rate, your EL, your growth and proficiency. Again, we're waiting on 9-12 because of the change that we did in April. At the bottom of the report card, you would see the summative letter grade.
Okay, I think I'm finally getting it.
So
I'm not as smart as some of you folks.
I believe it was Sean Rickert, I think. Sean Rickert talked about how schools are able to go in and actually see their indicator, right? And so if I'm a school administrator and I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm a K-8 administrator and my growth is a D. Well, I'm going to be looking at my students and saying, I'm not growing my students. How can I show more growth in my students? If we go into acceleration readiness, it's highlighted. You see how it's highlighted up there? I believe it's highlighted because you can click on it. Mm-hmm. So you can click on acceleration readiness and it will do the breakdown of everything that goes into acceleration readiness. So as an administrator, I would click on that acceleration readiness. I would see, well, I'm really not paying attention to my subgroups. So next year when I'm planning in the summer or whatnot, I'm going to ensure that I'm planning half a year in and making sure I'm really touching bases with all of my subgroups. This is an example.
Okay.
President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, members, just to clarify again for myself, is I understand that the overall the overall scoring or whatever, the 4.0 scale, that's staying consistent. My concern is that each of the components are being scored consistently across components, and then again that's going to be consistent when it shifts over to the overall grade. So we're not being arbitrary in how we are scoring each of the components. And moreover, when we're adding components, it's not going to be arbitrary, and so that cut score is not arbitrary. So I just want to be sure. Can you please just verify that piece of it for me?
Yeah. President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, Member Mack, what we are looking for is, you're right. Right now, as you look at those cut scores, those would be set based on this benchmarking model that would stay consistent. When and if, well, when, say for example, we don't do anything till 22, when we get that new assessment and we're looking at how we calculate proficiency, it is at that time that we will do standard deviation and bring to the board possible letter grades for proficiency that you would then approve based on the model that you deem fit and the best. Did that answer your question?
Yes, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I guess, I don't know. Okay, so benchmarking, following that model, but then at what you're saying standard deviation is coming back into the picture because it was in the picture, taken out of the picture, and then now being brought back into the picture.
Member Mack, standard deviation was used for the overall letter grade and when it did a little bit on EL, which we had to do some normalizing to even make it that way. We did the benchmarking so there wouldn't be significant changes because, as I stated earlier, certain components are not normal in there. However, when we change a component, so let's say we change growth and we change proficiency based on the new assessment, you would then be setting new A through F letter grades for each component. And one of the models we definitely would do would be standard deviation, just like we did models for the overall when any major change occurs to any of the components.
Members, let me jump in here. And I in our informal meeting, I like that we're all still following Robert's rules and going through the chair. So two things. One is a reminder, and I think most members remember when we had the new system in for the 16-17 school year. It didn't happen in the 16-17. We had the scores, and we had to figure out how to set the cut scores. And there were a few ways that we looked at it, and we looked at a 90, 80, 70 traditional cuts, but we ended up going with, and there were a couple other options, but we ended up going with setting the first year of cut scores using standard deviation because we felt that was a good distribution for the first year. And then we kept the same cut. We didn't reset standard deviation, but we set where that landed on the cut to try to keep consistency. And I think my second part of what I was going to say, I think, is maybe a request for Wendy that might help board members, but also selfishly myself, is, Wendy, maybe you could just walk through how these cuts for each of the indicators was set. So what was the thought process and how were they set? Just kind of walking us through blow by blow, because I think we're hearing the benchmark, but I think it would be helpful for members to hear like how that happened. Does that make sense?
Yes, give me just a second. So we took all the letter grades for 17 and 18, and we basically looked at the scores. We'll just start with A's because they're the easiest. Think of the A's like I gave in the example of the kids scoring 100%. We set that percentile cut score. So in the case of the kids with 100%, it was 67. In the case of A through F, those getting an A, it was 74 originally, but we did the slight adjustment to make it more consistent at 72. So we did that for each one of the letter grades, and we found a percentile cut score. Then we took the scores and we distributed them for basically growth and proficiency, because EL and acceleration readiness is too skewed. Percentiles do not work. So we took, and that 80% is the biggest part of K-8. So then we distributed the scores and we found out where that cut point was at 72. Let me get to and then the next one for B and C. Then what we did is we went ahead and set those points. We laid them out and we made sure it made sense. Were most of the schools that were getting A's remaining A's? Were most of the schools getting B's? And then it was consistent in like acceleration readiness. There's a lot of schools that got 9 or 10 points, but were D schools. And in these cases, some of those schools stayed D schools or an F school, even under the new modeling. So we didn't want to see anything change from what was originally happening. So we wanted to keep that consistency. Does that answer the question? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, members, that is my concern. I am a fan of the dashboard concept. I like the idea of being able to break out and for the public and for the school and for parents to be able to see how an individual school is performing in those areas. I think my issue is just that balance, because the letter grades have come to represent so much. There are the rewards and there are the punishments associated with school letter grades, that it's that tension between really like the concept and how do we allow a school to not surprise a school, not surprise a community, because the impacts are real, not just the punishments and the rewards, but the emotional impact on the culture of a school can be elevated and it can be demoralized. So just want to be really careful. That's the perspective I'm coming to this with right now, is that those changes really matter. And so the degree to which we can keep things the same so that schools can make changes. Every time we make a change, schools will respond. Sometimes it's in the positive way and the way we want them to. Sometimes it's those unintended negative consequences or negative impacts. But that's the perspective I'm coming to. I do really appreciate all of the work that has gone into it and the thoughtfulness, and that you're taking that particular perspective that we need the consistency for our schools. Thank you.
So, question. I won't follow Robert's Rules of Order, okay, if it's informal. On acceleration and readiness, give me the 30-second explanation of what the heck does that mean? You try to explain that to parents. You even try to explain it to teachers and staff. It seems like it's a mishmash.
President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, Member Ruiz, acceleration readiness. Someone's going to correct me if I'm wrong on this. I believe it was No Child Left Behind when we had the first accountability system. Kelly told me it predated that. So our first accountability system was still in line with what the federal government wanted, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. So when ESSA came out, part of ESSA had language in that allowed states to have accountability measures that were not tied specifically to an assessment or a test, right? I forget the terminology they use. Help me out.
Multiple measures.
Thank you. Multiple measures, right? And so the board, through their ad hoc, and the old board, because the makeup has changed, right? They really talked about how, and Member Baker, I know you're on the line, and Member Kay, so correct me if I'm remembering any of this incorrectly. They really thought about how can we put in these other measures and ensure that there's some type of quantitative data associated. So they came up with the idea of the accelerated math in 8th grade, right, to incentivize schools to provide Algebra 1 to their 8th grade students, right? Going back to the notion that Algebra 1 can predict how well you're going to do in post-secondary careers, education, college, et cetera. The next was subgroup performance, so breaking down the subgroups in a school and determining how well you were doing with those subgroups. Now, targeted support from the federal government, which is a school improvement, is associated with subgroup performance. So schools, and Member Kay, I'm sure you can talk about this, subgroup performance determines whether or not you qualify for federal dollars to help you improve your subgroup performance. And then we also have 3rd grade, move on when reading, and decreasing the amount of students that would fall under that cut score for retention. And looking at those 3, I'm not forgetting one, am I? Oh, chronic absenteeism was the 4th one. Thank you, Sean Rickert. Chronic absenteeism, because we really talked about what's going to make an impact on a child's education. And we know that if that child's at school, that's going to make an impact. And that was debated. chronic absenteeism definitely was debated both at the ad hoc level and the board level. I know we had a lot of public comment on it, but that's where the board felt comfortable of those four areas within acceleration readiness. And when you also take into consideration the different type of school makeups in Arizona, right? We have a lot of K-5s. So if you have K-5s, they're not going to be able to qualify for that 8th grade, but they can still qualify for the other 3. If you're a 6-8, you're not going to qualify for that 3rd grade, but you're going to qualify for that 8th grade math. So the 3rd grade and 8th grade kind of mirror each other. And then the subgroup and the chronic absentee, basically any school makeup can get those points for those indicators. Additionally, it kind of ties into the progress meter in Arizona as well, which the board adopted the progress meter, which is through Expect More Arizona. So.
Okay, that wasn't 30 seconds.
Sorry, I'm long-winded.
No, that's okay. So there's 4 categories. 5.
There's a 5th one?
You want me to list them?
You're making me look bad.
No, I thought you said all 5. I think you did say it. So there is the high school math taking, improving your minimally proficient grade 3, your chronic absenteeism, your special ed inclusion rate, and your improved proficiencies on your subgroups.
Okay. And do they all receive, so you get 10 points possible, there's 5 of them. Are there 2 points associated with each one of those 5 categories? Okay.
Memories, there is a matrix that sort of falls into play because the subgroup improvement right now, there's like 10 subgroups, but you get it for ELA and math, but we cap it at a certain number. I think it's 6. So, and then the other ones have different levels. You just can't exceed 10. So the schools have been doing really well over the last couple of years improving this, so you've seen us skew more and more to the right. But there's a chance there, and the subgroup improvement has gained a lot of attention and has been one of the most positive things with K-8.
So I can't resist. President Narducci, Madam Superintendent, and members. If the subgroup has gained a whole lot of attention, out of the 10 points, how many points are ascribed to that category?
Mary, did you have that? I have the overall. Was it 6 that they come in?
Yeah, 6 on subgroup, but there's the overall matrix,
okay.
and then your cap is 4.
I have trouble too, President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, Member Matt, and Member Reese. 4 points available for end of course math. A school could get 5 points. ELA, minimally proficient improvement, is 5 points. Chronic absenteeism is 2 points. Subgroup is 2 points per subgroup, up to 6 points available. So, and that has to do with a lot of studies that went into that. Same things we did for high school back in the spring, and special ed inclusion is 2 points. And I want to thank my ATAC members for having my back.
Smart people. Okay. I'll finish this up, I think, with are we going to do 9th and 12th after this? Or are we doing this all combined?
Sure. So, President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, Member Luis, 9-12 component scoring for A through F will be done at a later point because the department is waiting for the data to come back. If you recall, we were doing subgroup improvement rather than growth because we had the 55 mini schools last year. So we just have to wait for that data to come back, and then it would be presented to the board at a later time. So today was really just to look at what we currently have with ATAC and ADE has been hard at work at for the component A through F, knowing we have to do this for statute in some fashion, a dashboard, and then also for district scoring, which we haven't gone to district scoring yet.
Okay. So then
those 2 things.
I'll just make just a comment then at this point as we transition. So President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, and members, just because something works, I think there's two schools of thoughts here. One is that, try to keep everything the same so that everybody's doesn't freak out. But what if what you have just isn't sufficient for what's changed in Arizona? Arizona is rapidly changing. This is a state that is it's in convulsions because it's changing. And 3 years from now, it's going to change even more so. I think just if you look at demographic studies, wow, you don't recognize, it's not the same Arizona you saw 5 years ago, and you will not see the same Arizona 5 years from now. So given that, maybe we should look at mixing up or messing up the system a little bit. Sometimes it's okay. In Spanish, it's called suscitar. You mix it up. You got to mix it up because you're not satisfied with it. And I don't know. Yeah, I think there are some issues here. I think the whole issue of English language learners and students of special ed, growth, subgroups. I think maybe it's telling us, okay, let's try to keep consistency, but not at the price of where we're not advancing. So, thank you.
I have one question. President Narducci, members of the board. Member Ruiz, I was wondering, have you taken a look at the school report card website that's relatively new on our ADE website? Have you had a chance to look at that? Could I show you?
An F, no.
No, it's okay, because I think that visual, like I'm a very visual learner.
Yeah.
And so would you mind if I show you that as a resource? Because I think it would be really helpful for a conversation. I can go
Would
there.
you like me to lead it?
Yeah, and I can.
I'll get it up for you.
Okay. And because even for myself, I just pulled it up on my screen and I pulled up Acacia Elementary School because it wasn't at the top of the list. If you go to school report cards. So this is a new website that our department released
It's linked.
within the past year, and we've been making updates to it.
Right there.
Click. There it is.
Gotcha, guys.
And this is what we want parents to be going to get information about their schools. So if they can go right there, right there to schools.
Do you want me just to select a school, or you have one in
If you could just go to Acacia again, because I know I'm on it right now. There it is. For Vail. So this gives you an overview of the school. It has the school grade right at the top. Then the schools, this one didn't enter it. Yeah, actually, maybe we should pull up one that go back to schools. So schools are responsible for entering their own special characteristics. So actually, I know if you know one.
I hope so.
Because I know the Arizona School for the Arts also has a lot of detail. Yes.
Yes. Okay.
There you go. So schools can go in and enter all their special features, everything they're proud of. So parents have a lot of information when they're selecting a school or looking into their community school. Then go down. Then we have a lot of detail about the school but then if you keep going, it gets down into the grades, the school grades. So here's where you have some of actually go back up because you just passed accelerated.
Okay.
Right there, yeah. So that's where I read the description. So that's where the parent can find out what does that mean when we're calculating acceleration readiness. It doesn't have all the detail, but at least it gives you an idea. And then if you keep going down, this is what Wendy was showing us, that this is what parents currently see. So the idea is, and this is the question we're asking, does it make it more useful and understandable for community members if we take these points and turn them into letter grades and then use those letter grades to help determine the overall school letter grade? That's one of the questions that I think we're all thinking about right now. But I would say, because this system has continued to be tweaked over the past couple of years so frequently, that right now schools just want it to stay stable so they know what the target is. And I would advocate that we don't make any drastic changes to these areas. I did have the thought too, I have a background in special ed, that I was also thinking, there's this huge weight for EL growth and proficiency and not special ed, like what you were just saying. But also Arizona has the lowest high school graduation rate for our EL students. And so the more we can make that a priority and say that as a border state, that's going to be an Arizona priority, that we're all working towards EL growth and proficiency. I think that's really important to have, but still making sure that so the special ed piece is in two places actually, because it's in the bonus points and it's also in the acceleration readiness, right?
And
Because it's like
also,
bonus.
for clarity purposes, special education and performance is all broke out in the report card for parents who need to see more of subgroup improvement.
Yeah, I encourage everyone to play around on the website, because it's really interesting to look at all the data that's available and do school-to-school comparisons, and there's a lot of great information, and we're continuing to make improvements to this website, and so yeah, I think it's really exciting to see this. Thank you.
This is Member Baker. Let me add just a little bit more historical information on these. When we originally developed A through F, there was tremendous pressure to come up with evaluation points that were not tied directly to test scores, and that's where some of this attendance and acceleration of doing math, higher level math in the middle school came from. The second thing that we spent a lot of time talking about is that the grading system is not just an evaluation system, it is also an incentive system. So we wanted to plug things in that would encourage schools to do things that were good for kids. And I think the system is, and many of those things that were plugged in, I don't think they change as the state changes. Regardless of what happens in the state, it's good for schools to encourage kids to be at school, to improve for attendance go up. And it's good for schools to encourage kids to accelerate in the level of math because it pushes them forward and helps them to be better prepared for both high school graduation and college. So that's why some of those things are in, to reliance not just on test scores, and also to encourage schools to do things that are truly good for kids.
Members, this is Catcher. I kind of wanted to bring us back to the component scoring question, because we still, as Alicia mentioned, we still have to go over district letter grades. And I think before moving on to district letter grades, I wanted to ensure that every member had an opportunity to provide any input or thoughts or concerns, or maybe even potential direction for ATAC on something else that they would like to see. Because the next step for ADE is on both of these is to gather additional input from the field. Right now, this is things that ATAC has discussed, and now, of course, the board, and they would like to get some additional feedback from the field for potential board action in the fall, maybe even at our next board meeting. So I think I wanted to open it back up one last time on component scoring to see if any board members had anything else they wanted to share, or any direction that they wanted to give ADE and ATAC specific to the component scoring.
President Ardici, Superintendent members, thank you so much again, ATAC, for all your work in this. It's amazing to see. I guess I'm curious to see, and I don't know, is to see that is, and I'm sorry if I'm missing this, but I just want to make sure that the component scoring is truly reflective of that overall grade. Does that make sense? And there's no, because it seems like we're taking the benchmarking way, just to make sure that everything translates.
Catcher, should I bring up this quick table?
Sure.
There's like a 30-second delay too, so.
Okay.
Member Mac, if you're watching the live stream, just remember there's about a 30-second delay. So
oh yeah, if you just email it, that's fine. Or I'm on the
Catcher,
phone,
did you bring
so I'm
it
not
up?
seeing anything.
Oh, here we go.
Okay. So what we're going to be discussing, Member Mac, is the materials were provided in the email from Catcher for today's meeting. The document is titled
A-to-F component support documents.
So, Member Mac, what I'm going to do is, even though we have comparison here, I'm going to blow it up so we look at just the one side so everybody can see a little bit better. So let me explain how to read the table and read the percentage table really quickly and then give you a chance to view at it. Across the top is what their K-8 letter grade was. So in this case, we had 1,348 schools. In fiscal year 18, this is how those grades were distributed. If you look at the same percentage below, those numbers are down here. So you can see, based on the fiscal year 18 data, 28% were A's. 31% were B's, 28% were C's, and so forth. So over on this side, with rounding up and doing a GPA, this is how, of the component scorings which are on the next page, this is how the rounded GPA would come out. So where we had 374 A's before, now you would have 384. The change you can see here, that 305 and 79. So that's how many A's were. 79 were B's last year, who now became A's. So what I want to look at here is the percentage. So if you look here, 28% in fiscal year 18, we actually stayed at 28% under the new rounded version. 31, again, we increased B's, 28 to 25, 11 to 5, and then 3 to 1. That versus a straight benchmarking on the percentiles, we did not have as good performance. That's why we did adjusted percentiles to make it more reflective of what was actually going on with the previous scores. So that sort of shows you the two methods that we really went in depth with. Like I said, we briefly touched the other ones and found too much difference that would cause a huge difference. Below, you'll actually get them where you can see the proficiencies, the EL, the growth, and the acceleration, how they would play out against their actual over grade. What we saw when we did not change the overall cut points for K through 8, but we did the component scoring, is then it didn't match. So the GPA, it makes sense because you'd have a B, C. Let's do it the right way. We have an A, B, and C. You would expect a B. Without us doing a roll-up to a GBA, we were seeing 3 A's and a B, and the school would get a B. So that's why we wanted to make sure we had a consistent math formula so you wouldn't have those discrepancies by keeping, the standard deviation score, but did a roll-up from the components. I hope that helps. Let me know if you have questions.
Yeah, thank you, but that's exactly my concern. Anyway, I don't know what can be done, but yeah, it captures my concern. Thank you.
So, President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, members of the board, I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news, but the department's building does close at 5:30, and we do need to ensure that we get to the district scoring. So what I would suggest, if any board members, as you start thinking about this presentation, or maybe you rewatch the live stream, please feel free to email myself and Catcher, and we will ensure that your questions get over to Wendy, and we'll work that way for any additional questions we have for the component scoring. Is that okay with everybody? Hearing none, that's perfect. Okay. Wendy, let's move on to our next agenda item.
Okay, district letter grades. District letter grades, again, the ATAC committee has a great diversity, and we've had some really good conversations, but we want to bring this again to the state board because even though I'm going to show you the simplest of the models, you see that you have almost a 30-page support document that talks other models. So we're going to keep it at a high level, get the conversation going so that you also we can get your feedback, make sure we're going the correct direction. So again, why are we doing district letter grades? Because it's in legislation. So and district letter grades affect other areas, and they're talked about in legislation in other places. These are just 4 points that kept coming up in conversations with ATAC, and they've come up in conversations. We just wanted to have those up for you guys to review back and think about when I show you the simplest of the 3 models. So what are the three models? I sort of laugh when I say three models, because when we look at a mock school scoring, that means we treat every district like it was a school. Think about the configurations of the districts in the schools. Not all of them are unified. Some are K-8. Some have a K-2 in them. But actually, that is the big package you have. So we did mock school scoring. The other thing we did was we took all the letter grades that a school would receive, and we did GPAs. We did two kinds of GPAs. We did a straight GPA, and we did a weighted GPA. Weighted was based on the number of kids that were enrolled in that school. So what I'm going to share with you is the simplest of the three, and that is a regular non-weighted GPA. So for example, Peoria Unified has 42 schools. If they had 42 grades, they'd all roll up to a non-weighted GPA. Why were we looking at this and why are we bringing it forward? One is it's simple for schools and the community to understand. So if you were to open up a district and you look at the report card, you would see all their letter grades, and then you'd see the district had a GPA. It also has the district go back and look at their schools. So in this case, if a district is concerned with their letter grades, where's the first place they go? They go to see what grades their schools are getting. It's easy for the schools to calculate and reproduce. It's easy for the public to reproduce. The school or the district would then, if they chose to appeal their letter grade, they would be appealing a school's letter grade. So it focuses them again back on the schools. Nice thing about this is it would withstand any changes to the model. So as we change, or let's say we get a K3 model, we have our ALT model, we change because of the assessment, this model would stay consistent no matter how we do the A through F at the school level. So the district model would be very consistent with, it's against all the changes that'll come its way. This model we brought forward because it holds the schools accountable equally for all schools. And a lot of people are going to talk because this is a good conversation piece that you guys will want to have too. So whether you have a 2,500 high school and a 300 little specialty school, you would say they both matter. And as a district, we are going to pay attention to both. There's some opinions on that, and the ATAC people will come up and share some of their opinions, and that's a good thing. So I'm going to let some of our ATAC members come up and share some of their concerns with them. Don't all jump at once, guys.
It's getting close to good evening, President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, and the rest of the board. I'm David Jordan. I'm the Director of Research and Evaluation for the Glendale Elementary School District. We have 17 schools, but we only have 14 of the 17 schools that get letter grades because we have 3 K3 schools. So we're one of those where if we go to the models that were presented here and the district gets a letter grade, it's only going to represent about 5/6 of our district. That means we have 3 schools that will not be included at all in any of the accountability models. And the people at those schools, they take a lot of pride in the work that they do. So as we're kind of navigating through this, it's taking into consideration the districts that do have unique grade level configurations at their schools that would probably be excluded from any of the models that we currently have. And just as a representation of schools such as that and districts such as ours, we have schools that want to have a letter grade, but right now the current models don't fit that. So that's the in as much as I love the simplicity of what's presented, that's the one drawback for us right now.
I expect both of you gentlemen.
Okay.
My expectations are.
Members of the board, it's late. So my name is Kelly Powell. I'm with the Charter School Association. I'm more of a proponent of the weighted model just because of something that Member Reese was getting at, kind of a personal mission, but hopefully it'll be one of the focuses of ATAC. I think we need to do some validity studies. Validity, simply put, is a lot of people think of it as just an extension of reliability. It's like a number or something that you can quantify. It really isn't that. Validity is the understanding or the conceptualization, the interpretation of a score given the context. If you give us of a test in English to an ELL student, how do you interpret that? You get a score, but it's all about the interpretation. So in that work, I looked at the feeder patterns of essentially the suburban unified school districts, all of the elementaries going into the high schools. And if you look statewide, there were no, or just a couple suburban high schools, comprehensive high schools that had A's. If you looked at Paradise Valley, Deer Valley, Scottsdale, and some of the other districts like that, they could have almost all A's in their elementary schools feeding to exclusively B high schools. And that's a validity issue, the interpretation. When you compound that with the size of the schools, the differences there, they might be swamped. In other words, you could have a very large high school that would be overwrought by a bunch of A feeder schools. So I think you need to consider that. It solves the problem if there is a validity issue, but I think it also, you need to attend to the validity issue itself. So I'm a proponent of using weighted measures, particularly because you do have specialty, used to be programs, but there are now small college prep or very, what I would call boutique schools that have testing requirements to get into them, not in charters because that's against the law for charters. But for other districts, you can test into a university high or into other schools like that. And so I think they should be considered based upon the student enrollment. So I'm a proponent of the weighted average. That was a lot in one setting, but that's my take.
Standing on formality one more time, President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, members of the board, good evening. Sean Rickert, Superintendent, Pima Unified School District. I'll kind of echo what Kelly had to say. I mean, I understand the simplicity associated with the straight approach. However, my district is a small, 1,000 kids, K-12. We have a K-6, we have a 7-8, we have a 9-12. The idea that the 7-8 grade, which is usually the lowest because you've got 8th grade math making up half of your math and all of the issues that are associated with that. And so that grade becomes a third of the district letter grade, even though it's only 2 out of all the grade levels that are tested. It just seems like there's some issues there. And, even aside from weighting, how we look at it. But I think that by weighting based on the number of students at a school within a district, you could get a fair distribution on the letter grade altogether. But, and part of it too, I think we can be careful with district letter grades, maybe even say generous with district letter grades, because kind of, look at that. You go back to the questions. I mean, who's using the information? We talk about school letter grades. We talk a lot about, parents use that information to make decisions about schools, maybe if they aren't making those decisions based on where their kids' friends go to school. But when it comes to district letter grades, that's almost entirely internal in terms of the district uses it. There are statutes that apply in terms of regulatory requirements for districts based on their letter grades. And teachers look at that in terms of how they feel about the job they're doing. And so I think that there's room there to be, maybe more generous. And so an approach to letter grades for districts, they're still important, but maybe not for the same reasons. A lot of the reasons we just talked about with component scoring, about why it's important that it be transparent, why it's important. Those things aren't necessarily as important, I think, with district letter grades. And I hope you'll take that into consideration when you look at what's the best model.
I got a question. President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, members. So why do we need the district letter grade? Is that statutorily required? And so
under that same 15241 that we talked about earlier, one of the requirements in there is that there is a district letter grade. And then there are also, I believe, about a dozen other statutes that reference a district letter grade in terms of whether or not a district has to turn in a literacy plan, whether or not a district qualifies for different programs. So all of that, and that's something that I'm sure staff could lay out in terms of all of the references to district letter grades, but they are required by statute.
Member Ruiz, can I make a comment about that? Members of the board, that I just want to make it clear too that the letter grades are not federally required. These are state requirements. So I think that as a board, we should be discussing I think we have a role in discussing the fact that we already have school grades, which gives a lot of information. What is this district grade really for? And if we don't like it, then that needs to change by the legislature. It's a legislative issue. It's in state statute. So I think that's a conversation we can have and should have, especially as we move forward. But I just wanted to point that out, that that's not federally required to have a district grade or even a school letter grade. I think that's an important point.
So then why do we have it?
Because the legislature passed it.
That had a reason. So what was the reason? Does anybody remember the reason?
So Superintendent Hoffman and President Arducci, if he's still on the phone, and Member Ruiz, I don't want to speak to intent. I can tell you what the legislature has used district letter grades for in statute, and that, as Superintendent Rickert pointed out, is literacy plans. A and B districts only have to submit their literacy plans every other year rather than every year. There's a provision that allows for a certain school district consolidation if a district has a certain high letter grade and another district does not have that same letter grade. ESA eligibility is based, one eligibility factor is the school's letter grade, but also the district's letter grade. So those are just a few examples. I think it's probably fair to say that school letter grades are used more robustly, I guess we'll say, in statute. So things like results-based funding, things like school improvement, those are more frequently mentioned and also have a higher impact. There's a reason that when the board prioritized which letter grades to do first, traditional school letter grades were at the top of the list. But those are some of the other uses for it. And I think another frame of reference, and there are some other references to them, but I think those are probably the most significant. And certainly, for literacy plans, it's something that the board deals with specifically and has as part of our ad hoc committee recommendations. But I think Wendy might be able to, maybe a frame of reference. I'm sorry, I didn't prep her for this. So I don't know if she has it off the top of how, because we had district letter grades under the old accountability system and how those were calculated. Might just a frame of reference for what we're looking at.
When we used to do the district letter grades prior to the change of the assessment, the model was very simple. So basically, the district actually did the same model as the schools did. But at that point, there was growth, proficiency. 50% was growth, 50% was proficiency, and then you had some bonus points for EL, graduation, and dropout, I think, for the high schools. Mm-hmm. So that model at the district level was actually quite simple to calculate.
President Arducci, President Hoffman, members, I was actually looking at the other two models, and that was kind of where my head went when it said district grades. I'm wondering why Model 3 and 4 were not discussed, because it seems like some of the concerns that were mentioned, such as schools not being counted, would be more alleviated by using a Model 3 or 4, where we're looking really at the component scores and gathering those together. I'm just curious, because, going straight from a school grade to the district grade, it's that 3 degrees of separation. So we're getting further away from the actual components and the actual students that are making up the scores. And then the other piece of it was that I know we said with the school grades, schools would only be able to file or contest a component score, but at the district level, districts could contest individual school scores. So, it's going to be a school, either way, they're going to have the way to just, argue their school grade. So, coming down to it, whether you tell the school they can't do it, the district can do it. So, I'm kind of curious as to see, why not Model 3 and 4? Does it not resolve some of the issues? Was that ever a discussion, or is there something I'm not seeing?
Member Mack, it's Wendy. We brought everything forward. We just showed the easiest one. I will tell you, one of the concerns we had when we do mock school, as we call it, is as we build an AOI model and probably a small school or a K-3 model, then we're looking at schools, districts having to understand how their score is calculated, like a non-traditional that may have an AOI, an alternative school, K-8s, and 9-12s. So if you think about how a high school and the time that is spent currently just at one school level coming to understand their grade taking all those different models up to a district grade may cause challenges. It's not that it couldn't be done. That's why we did all the work on it, but it's up for discussion. We didn't, that's, I said, that's why we were hoping this board in today's meeting study session will give us a little guidance of the direction you're heading.
I'm just still trying to wrap my head around what's the purpose of a district grade, and I can't see it. So help me. If you're a proponent of a district grade, then help me get there, because I can't see where it helps.
Well, President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, Member Ruiz, and the board's in a situation where it's state law. So as you know, President Narducci talks about this all the time. And I don't know if he's still on the phone. The state board has to follow state law.
Right.
So when the state law is governing to the state board that there needs to be a district letter grade, I mean, that ultimately is a reason for having one. Going back to what Superintendent Hoffman was talking about is if the board decides, if you have a conversation and the board's like, we really don't think district letter grades are needed, that conversation can occur. Staff can take that to legislators. But right now in the political realm of Arizona, politically, I don't think that getting rid of district letter grades would occur. I could be completely wrong. I don't think Catcher, have you had any conversations with? No conversation. I have not had any conversations about removing the district letter grade. So
It's it's out of sight, it's out of mind, though.
yeah.
So they don't. Yeah.
So the best, I would recommend, as the executive director, the best course of action is to follow what we as the state board, right? My job is to protect all of you. This is law. We should follow law. And if we have a conversation and the board wants staff to start having legislative conversations with people and stakeholders, then, we work for the board. So, but I would also recommend that. I'm sorry, President Narducci. Hello.
Yeah, hello there. I was just going to say I'll break protocol and I'll call you Alicia and I'll call Catcher.
Okay.
And I'll even call Armando right now. The thing that I'm thinking is that we get a situation where we have to follow state law, and Alicia is exactly right. And Superintendent Hoffman, I understand the state law, federal law doesn't require it, but state law does. And as you know, all the federal law is it gives us no less shall we be, and state law can always be more aggressive. And they decided to be more aggressive. So until the legislature's changed, or until the department or whomever wants to change the law so that it's not required of us to put a district grade out there, we have to put a district grade out there. And I think the best that we can do is actually put a district grade out there and then have the brains that are trying to discuss this stuff to us and help me understand it, because I think I am worse than you, Armando. I don't understand it. I don't know why we need to have it. I just know it needs to be there. And we have to put some real good frosting on it in order to make a purpose and get the district grade out there. And then if the legislatively in the future we can remove it, or it's shown not to be necessary, we don't comply with that part of the law because it's not law any longer, that's where we are.
Okay, I get it. I understand. You got to follow the law, but I have not heard anybody yet here say that we should have it. So, maybe that's part of the discussion and part of the recommendation is, hey, legislature, we all looked at it and somebody help us and justify it, or educate us.
And President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, Member Ruiz, I think if the board goes in that direction of having a conversation of whether or not they think district letter grades are appropriate for the state of Arizona, I would recommend the whole board is here in person, so that we can actually play off each other. Expression and body language plays a good part, because I would hate to just make an assumption based upon a couple. I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm just saying, but you never want to do that with board policies. So If that's something that the board wants to discuss later on, then we can do that.
Oh yeah, my only point, Alicia, was that we need to comply with law. Until it's an agenda item for a study session as to what we want to do, it is what it is, and we gotta do what we gotta do.
This is since President Arducci went to first names. This is Cal. I think the ATAC has done a great job with this issue, and there are so many different variations from one level to the next in terms of how the system works. That go back to a district-wide system like we used to have that worked well under the old system. It's just way too clumsy and difficult for people. In terms of the weighted or unweighted GPA, I'm strongly in favor of the just straight unweighted GPA. It's something everyone understands, and they understand that, whether they're taking Algebra 2 or they're taking physical education at 4.0 or that A or the B that they earn, it may not be the most technically precise model, but working with parents and working with most teachers, understandability is just huge. So in this case, I think that simplicity and understanding trumps precise fairness.
Let me see if I can understand this. The main difference between the weighted and non-weighted, what is it?
Remember, Reese, it's the enrollment of your students. So a high school that has 2,000 versus one of your elementaries that have 500, it would be weighted based on enrollment. So that high school would carry a lot more weight.
So, Wendy, when we look at the proposed models for district grades, which was the secondary attachment, that would be model 2 that you just, the weighted.
No, that would be the weighted GPA. The mock schooling is the file that you're looking at, I do believe. Oh, I think you're right. Yes. You're right. I'm going to turn it over to Kim. Kim is one of our analysts who wrote this big book, and let her answer those questions on the book. So the answer is yes, I do believe.
So model 1 is what was presented in the PowerPoint presentation, the district GPA with averaged grades.
President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, members of the board. That's correct. The first model that was presented is unweighted, where every school is represented equally, and then the second model is weighted by the size of the school in the fall enrollment.
President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, it seems to me, though, that the weighted model is more in line with some of the discussions we've had historically about every student counting. And so if we're looking at every student matters, then certainly a student population should be taken into consideration. So while you might have 10 schools in a district and 5 of them are really small and 5 of them are really large, or how are we looking at how are individual students performing? And I realize this is a district letter grade, but it just seems more consistent to me to do the weighted model because it reflects individual student performance as well.
So President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, Member K, to your point, I think and correct me if I'm wrong, Wendy, or anyone from ATAC, I think the flip side of the student weighted is that you could have, if you have a very large school, that school is going to, get you more points, where maybe you shift your funding, you shift your focus to the larger school for the district letter grade. again, it's never going to happen. Educators are not going to do that. But I just want to point out both. And I know Sean Rickert, Sean, you wanted Model 2, right?
Members, and before to tee this up for Sean, also just as some additional information for you, the differences in the modeling between Model 1 and Model 2, the weighted and the unweighted, are on a statewide level statistically negligible. And so that comes down to what the board is either trying to incentivize or what it more aligns with in terms of its messaging and the message to the LEAs. So, I mean, the weighted and the unweighted, obviously, and I don't want to discount those LEAs that would go down a letter, the districts that would go down, obviously it's important, but, when we're looking at maybe a dozen schools who would change a letter grade, it statistically on a statewide basis is negligible. So I would encourage the board to think about some of those other things that were already brought up. To Sean.
Okay. So President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, members of the board, it does get kind of tired after a while. So, talking to the mic. And okay, I will speak into the microphone. So, and my original perspective on this, when I first looked at it, was I feel strongly that the board's principle of looking at student level data when ascribing letter grades for schools or districts that's kind of a foundational principle that we've had going back as long as I've been paying attention to this, which isn't as long as many, but it's been a little while. And so I felt like the mock school scoring approach was closest to that principle, that really is where you say, okay, how does every student doing within the district? You treat the district like a school. We have hybrid models for dealing with K-9 or 6-12 configurations. We've solved all of those issues. Yes, it's not expedient, but it does keep close to that. To Member Baker's point, though, I looked at it and said, that really is awfully cumbersome, very difficult to explain. And so where another sort of foundational principle was the question of transparency and the ability to explain and understand how we're giving grades, that doesn't really achieve that goal. Whereas the weighted GPA approach maintains, to Member Kay's point, maintains that student level recognition that every kid is important and the number of kids at a school should kind of lend weight to that school's letter grade in the district model, as opposed to the straight GPA, which, yes, it is simplest, but you're losing, now you're compromising the student level principle overly, I feel, to the practical application. So that's where, when people talk, in a lot of the discussions that the ATAC has had, I had advocated strongly for a mock school scoring approach, but in today's discussion, I've kind of through conversations and through thinking about things realized that the weighted approach accomplishes the things that are most important.
So I just want to clarify for the board members when Mr. Superintendent Rickert,
call me what you want, Sean.
Sean, yes, that's a study session. When you are talking about a mock school scoring, and I'm looking in this document, which model is that?
Models 3 and 4.
Okay, so for all of the board members and the public who will be watching this later, when we're talking about mock school scoring, we're looking at models 3 and 4 in the handy-dandy proposed models for district letter grades document. That's lovely put together. Thank you. And then when we talk about, we weighted as model 2 and straight GPA is model 1. Okay, thank you.
That is correct.
President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, members, just for clarification, I agree that models 3 and 4 is more closely aligned to the student level, but given that we're having at least a few members, the discussion regarding the necessity beyond the statutory requirement for district letter grades, those particular models seem like a tremendous amount of resources and explanation, and just seems really cumbersome to go down that path. That's why I was saying between the two, the weighted and the unweighted models, I was supportive of the weighted.
There is some precedent, because I'm trying to look at what other models that have ever looked at when you have, and I look at the Constitution, electoral college. There's a reason why you have electoral votes out of small states. U.S. Senate. There's a reason you have 2 U.S. senators from small states, because otherwise everybody would just go to, if you're a Democrat, you go to New York, you go to California and Chicago, and you're done. If you're Republican, you go to Texas, and you win. But it's important that everybody be counted. So we have 2 U.S. senators from small states, as opposed to also large states. So that's a model in terms of comparison. You've got the electoral college. That's another model for comparison. So if you think that, it's important to have small schools represented in that final district grade, everybody's going to have to pay attention. If you're superintendent, you're going to have to pay attention to that school that maybe's got 200 kids. And as opposed to maybe one of your schools has got 1,500. You could, if your school that has 1,500 gets an A, and your other school that's 200 or 300 gets a D, you're going to come up with an A. And does that really reveal the success of the district-wide?
President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, I think the challenge is the flip side is true too. If your small school has the A and your 1,500 school has the poor letter grade.
Right.
So I think no matter, it depends on your perspective.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so President Narducci, Superintendent Hoffman, members of the board, we have about 10 minutes left. And so what I'm thinking we're going to do is I think we will focus on Model 1 and 2 for district letter grades and have a more robust board discussion, most likely at the August board meeting on those 2 models. So that's good work. Seems like we kind of took 2 models off the table, I think. But maybe not, but we'll just go focus on 1 and 2. We'll bring it back in August. And what I also think is board staff, we had a lot of questions today on accountability in general, just letter grades, district letter grades, school letter grades, alternative schools, AOIs. So I think board staff will work on doing maybe a webinar for the members, or we'll schedule some time with members so we ensure that when we go to that additional study session at the August meeting, we've caught everyone up to the history of accountability in Arizona. And Member Baker and Member Kay can help me write that book. We'll make a lot of money.
I'm not shaking my head yes anymore.
Is there anyone on the phone? Are you all okay with that plan going forward?
Yes. This is Member Burton. I think that's a great plan.
Sounds good to me.
Same here, Luke.
Okay, perfect. So for those of you who will be watching later, this is my time to instruct the board members who are on the phone. Again, if you view this video and you have any questions or concerns, you can email Ketcher and I, and we will forward them on to Wendy as you watch this video. And then we have the next 2 things that board staff will work on. So with that, I will call this meeting, the special study session of the board, adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good.
Well, thank you.
Everyone.